Good morning. So excited to be here with you at this amazing event. And I am joined by some amazing leaders who are doing incredible work at the forefront of district policy and AI. So we're just gonna get right into it. First, I just wanna say thank you for being brave and being willing to talk about things that aren't yet fully done. I think in our sector, we spend a lot of time celebrating when something gets over the finish line, but so much of I think what we can share today is learning that happens from being in the mix and being in the middle. So I just really appreciate that. So Melissa, I'm gonna sort of start with you and we're gonna go quickly down the line. Can you tell me a little bit about how AI policy development is aligning with your district or organizational goals right now?
Right. Really, AI is completely tied to our graduate profile. So in 2018, we put together a very deep graduate profile in which it outlines the competencies that we want our students to have as they matriculate to college and career. So when you look at that, you see things like using digital tools, critical thinking, using social agency, being a global collaborator. And so when I think of AI policy, I think it's absolutely necessary to make our students competitive for the jobs of the future, to get on board and not sit on the sidelines.
I love that. Jerry?
Same. During January of 2020, we began the process of developing a graduate profile, learner profile similar to Melissa. And throughout 7 months of that conversation, really identified the characteristics that we wanted our students to have when they left us. Embedded in those characteristics are global citizen, ethical leaders. And so we're using that document as our North Star, as a driver to have conversations with our principals, with our community about how do we prepare our kids for the 21st century, innovation and AI being a part of that. So it's really it's opened the door in a safe, vulnerable space to have conversations about what we want to expose our kids to that is different than what they've been exposed to, because all of the assessment results that have come out, the PISA results, the national assessments on reading and math, not much has changed. So our rationale is, what are we gonna do different? And that's where this AI and this innovative conversation takes place.
Great. Amber, you're in a little bit of a different seat than a district leader. Robin Hood supports many organizations that work with New York City Public Schools, as well as a number of others. Tell me how you're seeing AI fit those organizational goals, either of Robin Hood or the organizations that you all support.
Yeah, so our goal is to see how we can tap into the power of technology to really ensure that students are achieving the kinds of learning that we know is possible. And for us, we see this as one of the greatest opportunities, we think, to really bring grade level, rigorous, engaging, affirming education to students. But we think that AI policy is really critical at the district level in collaboration with the districts, the schools, and the communities they're serving, because without it, we're really worried that it could exacerbate inequities. So we both are seeing the promise, but wanting to mitigate the risks. And so for us, this is the opportunity to do that and to do it differently than we've done it in the past with all the stakeholders at the table.
I appreciate you mentioning sort of the simultaneous tension between promise and peril. Delia, tell me a little bit about how AI policy is aligning to New York City Public School goals.
Absolutely. I think I would echo Melissa and Jerry a little bit in terms of thinking about, our mission as a whole system is really about the bold futures for our students and ensuring that every student graduates on a pathway to a rewarding career, economic security, but also how can they be a positive change for their community and the world at large, and really thinking that AI can be that transformative power, one for education, but then also for the role that our students will play in their futures. And then just to echo Amber, that it is so important to have everybody at the table as we are starting to think about what this will look like. What will this look like in classrooms? What will this look like for teachers? What will this look like for sort of everybody in the system to make sure that we're making the right choices?
So we have the enormous privilege at the EDSAFE AI Alliance to work with each of you in district level policy labs, but each of you has chosen a different problem of practice within your policy lab. Jerry, can you start and talk a little bit about the problem of practice that you selected and why you chose that?
Yeah, so I think for us, the challenge was, what are we going to do differently? How are we going to teach differently? How are we going to lead differently? And to piggyback off of what the lady said, is that it has to start at the top. We have to create policies and guidance that give teachers a safe space to operate in, as well as our site administrators. So the question is, how are we going to lead? How are we going to teach? And how are we going to learn differently? And so what that conversation has evolved into in Santa Ana is the conversation around the development of the framework for the future. And so we're in the final stages of that, which identify redefining our mission and our vision statement, but also what components of the framework for the future that impact directly the instruction that takes place in the classroom. More project-based learning, things like why do kids have to come to school 5 days a week? Can it be flipped? Can we come 3 days and 2 days be off in the community and doing some sort of internship? So those conversations are taking place, and that's really the problem of practice, is how are we learning differently, how are we teaching differently, and how are we leading differently?
I love that. Melissa, the work you all are doing in family and community engagement, I think is best in class.
Thank you.
And I know that is the problem of practice that you all chose around family and community engagement. Why choose that and not acceptable use policy or something else? Tell me a little bit about why you made that choice.
Well, El Segundo is a very unique community. It's known as Mayberry by the Sea. And we're right by LAX. We're right by a greater metropolitan area. But it's just like a little hometown. And our parents are extremely sophisticated, and they will not hesitate to get in their car and drive to another school district or to a private school if we do not stay on the cutting edge. So by engaging with families, students, teachers, getting them all in the room and talking about AI at a deep level with research-based vetted questions started the conversation, and our community has bought in. I have parents knocking on my door saying, please, please, put me on the AI advisory committee moving forward. Our teachers aren't ready for that yet because we've got a separate committee going with them, but that is our next step. So deep community involvement will define our policy going forward, and it is my goal to have that policy adopted by June 30. So it will happen, and it's going to be ever evolving because everything's rapidly changing so quickly.
I really appreciate that. I think another feature of the policy labs that folks should know about is every one of you has committed to an open science approach. So sharing the materials, the policy, the agendas, the process at the beginning. And I think that is extraordinary and a huge contribution to equity, to Amber's point, in terms of making sure that districts who might not have the resources or the bandwidth to take an AI policy piece on right now can sort of have at least some starter dough. Delia, your problem of practice is pretty big and diverse, guidelines and guardrails. Talk a little bit about why you all thought about that. And I'd love if you would hit on some of the ways you guys are really getting unique inputs, including the Student Policy Lab, which I know you spoke about yesterday with Moses and a great crew.
Absolutely. So I think, thinking about New York City public schools is just how large it is, the scale of the work that has to happen. And so much of our work is really thinking about how do we scale and sustain what works. And we have 47 different districts just within New York City public schools. And so we really have to think about what does it mean if something works in one context, and how do we ensure that that can actually work across contexts? And so that means having every division within the system at the table to talk about it. So yes, teaching and learning, but also legal, and also our IT department, and also our students. And so that we make sure that we don't inadvertently create some of the divides that the panel just before was talking about, that we make sure that if something is working in one school or in one district, that we have the capacity to think about how do we make sure that that works in all of our districts because we have so many and they are so diverse. And so I think that's been really important. I love having the students be able to speak about it, and also just learning about how actually like the student work then also flips into parent work and also informs teacher work. We had one young student who spoke about how her work in the policy lab has made her think about, well, how does she use AI for her parents at home? And so in effect, actually her work is helping her to change a divide that might exist at home.
I love that. So Amber, you have such a wide purview around the different types of social sector organizations that are at the intersection of technology and education. Can you talk to me a little bit about what you think the problems of practice are for those organizations right now?
Yeah, I think, and I'm thinking about it specifically in relation to the work also that New York City Public Schools is trying to do. The first thing that comes to mind is that our school system is a system of learning, but it isn't a learning system. And one of the things is, while we're talking about AI today, in the next 5 years or less, could be even 6 months, we're gonna have an entirely new technology. And how do we make it so that the organizations that are supporting them and the system itself is able to be sufficiently agile that it can figure out what's going on quickly, determine how it's going to respond to that, and then shift what happens internally so that it can actually do what it needs to do quickly? I think most of us remember, I'll date myself, when a technology would come out, we'd have a few years to figure it out, then have 5, sometimes 10 years to exist in that new status quo. I just don't think that's the reality. So this capacity to be a real learning engine or learning system, I think, is the number one. And then the other one is thinking about bias. As technologies have more and more quote unquote autonomy, how do we exist in that space knowing we can't eradicate the bias, but we need to be able to navigate it?
I appreciate the point. Can I push a little on something you just said around learning system? I mean, we see a lot of ed tech companies, and yet I don't think we've realized the promise of education technology and education. Tell me how this could be maybe different. How do we use this moment to think about that and to think about maybe not repeating some of the mistakes we've made in the past?
That's a big question.
I know. I know you can handle it though.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we're wrestling with is how different a moment this actually is, right? And I think that a lot of what we're going through now is similar to the advent of the internet, the cell phone, the personal computer, and just making sure that we are leading with the problem that we're seeking to solve, and not the idea that we need to be using technology for technology's sake. The other thing is that I think that there's more conversation now, perhaps because of what happened to many of us who went through the blended learning and massive online open course movements, that we know that we need the human in the loop. That if we can figure out a way to move forward with AI that has a human technology entanglement, as George Siemens says, I think that we can actually get closer to what it is that we are seeking to do. The past, we didn't do that. We also had the table that we were setting, to use some of your language, was pretty homogeneous, with just very few people sitting at that table. And I think one of the things our panel is talking about, right, from Melissa's engagement with families and what Delia was talking about students, is that we're understanding that we need to have the table have many more seats at it if we want to achieve what it is we want to achieve. So I think those are 3 things maybe we could do differently.
Maybe we need to break the table a little bit.
Break the table.
Yeah, let's break the table. So this idea that a human needs to be in the loop is really important, but also this idea that AI has to be effective and built for purpose and for a specific use case makes me think about something a very smart person said to me in the last couple days, where they said the daisy chain from AI to student outcomes is very long. And so that smart person is one of these 4 people on stage. Melissa, when you are thinking about AI policy, why is it so critical to working on AI policy to achieve student outcomes? Tell me, what's the link?
Well, as we all know, our students are digital natives. It has been fascinating between individual interviews and watching group interviews take place with students. They're using it. If anybody in this room thinks that, oh, we're going to put a policy in place that they can't access it or they can't, they will find a way, okay? They will find a way. Our usage has gone up 900% with students since September. We're tracking it monthly. And so we've got 8 teams of kids coming today to compete in an AI EDU competition of some sort.
Love it.
That Brett Rower put together.
Yeah.
And so the kids are excited. They realize that this is the connection to the jobs of the future. I was reading the World Economic Forum job report from 2023, and it indicated the #1 growing job is going to be AI and machine learning specialists. What is that? I don't know, but the students need to know. And we have an educational responsibility to make sure they're prepared and equally have those opportunities for all students.
Jerry's going to plush you up right now.
Yeah.
I mean, what would you add, Jerry? AI to student outcomes.
Well, I think it's an equity issue for me.
Yeah.
It is my moral responsibility to make sure that kids in my community have access to the tools and the resources to be competitive in a global market. But also, I want to swing back to the AI policy question about why it's important, because it gives teachers cover to be vulnerable in the classroom, to explore, to experiment, knowing that the district and the policymakers within their organization have put some thought into making sure that it's a safe environment to do that. And so what I've experienced these past couple of months as we finalize our guidance is that we can be talking about it for a long time until it's perfect. Or one of my teachers made a comment that, look, we just have to get it across the finish line, knowing that we're going to come back, and because there's a clause in the guidance that says after 4 months we're going to review, because the environment is changing so quickly. Policy, on the other hand, is different than guidance. That's going to take a little bit more longer because it's a little bit more technical, and we have some conversations taking place at the state level.
Yeah.
That, but in speaking with our legal counsel, it's the same thing. We're going to get the policy across the finish line, knowing that we may have to change the policy the next time the legislation changes some rules.
I love the 2 things you just said, agility and feedback loops, and reminding our audience that policy is a blunt instrument. And so you really have to think about that. Delia, student outcomes, AI policy. Make the link.
Really quickly, right?
Yeah.
So I think what we have to think about, and this came from the policy lab and making sure that we had representation from special educators there as well. And they really talk about, and this connects also to what Amber is saying, is how are we making sure that we are choosing the right tool for the problem at the right time?
Yeah.
And we're not just sort of like arbitrarily saying like, well, AI is out there and we have to use it. But really thinking about, as we think about why are we using a tool, what is the problem that we're trying to solve for, and how do we make sure that that is the right tool at the right time for the right group of people. And so I think that policy helps us to start thinking about like the questions that we should be asking ourselves, and not necessarily just telling us what it is that we need to do, but what is the kind of thinking we need to do as we choose.
Okay, we have 1 minute left, so be quick. I'd love for you to give industry, district superintendents, you can choose your audience, students, educators, one piece of advice. You have 10 seconds. You can think about it. One piece of advice.
I'll go first.
There you go. Thanks, Jerry.
Author Jane McGonigal says we have to imagine the unimaginable.
Yes. Get in the game. Don't sit on the sidelines.
Equity. Remember that it has to be bringing people all together, rising all boats, not exacerbating the inequities we already have.
And I think in order to do that, we need to collaborate, and we need to really think about collaboration broadly.
And I'll take moderator's purview. One of the things I think that has been really helpful for us as we think about AI policy is starting with safety. That safety in our space is table stakes. And so if you aren't thinking about that as the place that you're starting, then you are gonna face some really hard conversations with your community. Thank you so much.
Yes.
We'll see you soon.